Good morning. My name is Ashley Hanson. I'm a member of the Infused Product Committee with the National Cannabis Industry Association. I'm here today with Mike Perry of PNX Botanicals, a large-scale producer and wholesaler of hemp extract, cannabidiol, CBD. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Great. The topic today is about CBD and THC products, and the IPC has been focused on dosing, testing, and labeling. I'd like to start by asking you to briefly explain the difference between hemp extract, CBD, and THC for those who might not know.
Okay, well, so for those that might not know, I guess we'll do it on a general level, and for those who might not know and not get too granular, but cannabis, as everybody seems to know, is cannabis sativa L, and at some point, mankind made a couple of different distinctions between the kinds of cannabis, and that would be primarily industrial hemp and then what was generally referred to as marijuana, and people making marijuana or psychotropic cannabis extracts and cannabis would have been looking for things with more cannabinoids, but primarily THC, as it's the one that gets you high. And so for most of history, that high was associated with the medicinal benefits, and is largely true, but it turns out to only be one of the cannabinoids that have medicinal impact. And CBD, of course, is the one that's gained a lot of traction and research in recent years. And it happens to be the dominant cannabinoid in what was being used in mostly Europe and North America for industry. So the stuff that everyone was making ropes and animal bedding and fiber and clothes and pulp turned out to have this thing called CBD, which has a very high level of therapeutic value. And so you would have formerly called this industrial hemp because it's used in industry, and you would have called the other stuff marijuana because the governments thought it was bad and illegal, and gave it that name. At this point in modern history, the difference between industrial hemp and marijuana, or cannabis as it's popularly called now, would be the THC content, and that's mostly a governmental and not a single one. In Europe, it was 0.2% THC on dry weight basis would qualify as marijuana. In the United States, it's 0.3, although it's moving around. So the distinction now is a legal one. Governments have decided how much of the psychoactive component THC a plant can have to have one or the other title. So
what is hemp extract? How does it differ from CBD?
Well, CBD is, like THC, is a cannabinoid, which is a single molecule, which is found in cannabis, so generally in the trichomes, which is that crystally pretty thing that everyone sees when they do the close-up photography, is where the most of the concentration of the cannabinoids are. And so CBD is just another one of those, one of 80, 90, or 100, depending on what exact report you read, one of the cannabinoids. But hemp extract itself is an extract of the entire plant, or generally speaking, the valuable part of the plant, which would be the flower. And that may or may not have CBD. It usually does, and it may or may not have THC in trace quantities, and it will have lots of other minor cannabinoids and terpenoids or terpenes, and all kinds of other molecules. So in a standard hemp extract, you might have 200 or 400 molecules, depending on your extraction technique. Among them would be a very high concentration of CBD, if that's what you're looking for, and hopefully other minor cannabinoids and trace THC as well. So, but CBD itself can be isolated, and that, as you know, is in an industry called CBD isolate, and it's generally a solid crystallized form of just the singular CBD molecule, not a component part of the extract itself.
Do you think educating consumers and regulators on the manufacturing process would help our two industries better understand dosing and product content and safety?
Yeah, of course. For me, it's kind of a matter of who's doing that education and what their let's say motivations are, because if the industry could come together in a true community sense and take the best ideas and disseminate them. Certainly, the industry would benefit because it would, be more or less free information to all companies and a set of instructions that they could follow, which would help them to operate more safely, more effectively, and more profitably. But that's a tricky thing because, in my experience, the industry doesn't really want to share that kind of value information. The organizations that I've seen come together for the purpose of educating other companies, generally speaking, when we speak of other companies, we're talking about small and medium enterprise startups, people who don't have either the capital or the investment or the experience or the personnel to do things as the big companies would say is correct or right and safe. And so what I've seen is a bunch of self-regulating organizations, which essentially seems to be their function is to make things so hard for small companies that they alone will monopolize the market. So I think there's kind of a danger in asking this question because historically the answer has been the promotion of commercial benefits of large companies. And as a small and medium enterprise advocate, I've found myself fighting against that more often than I've found myself agreeing with the platforms put forward by the self-regulating organizations. So, and then when you pass that along up to government, I think that a lot of larger corporations, the corporations that tend to have the good government relations, are doing the same thing. They're kind of promoting their own commercial interests by over-regulating a market where they are equipped to compete and at the expense of small and medium enterprises. And of course, I find that stifling to innovation and generally speaking, well, fair or unfair, it's not the way I like to go about my business. And so the answer is yes. If we could keep advocacy pure, then of course I would love to put an instruction sheet out there that tells people best practices and that everyone can follow, but not for a large fee and not to the exclusion of startups, small and medium enterprises. So
yeah, I can agree with that. We see that happening on the cannabis side, legal cannabis side all the time.
Yeah. Well, there's a real irony. I mean, when I got into advocacy at the start of the modern CBD movement, there were certainly advocates that were working years before Sanjay Gupta exposed CBD into the world, and people like me jumped in. But let's just say at the roots of the modern advocacy, I've seen it happen that friends and colleagues who were grassroots and looking to promote the plant and the industry, clearly for their own commercial benefit, but also through an altruistic lens, it seemed. And then once we won some of the battles and CBD became mainstream, and this happened even more in THC, to be frank. Once it became once there were some large companies, those large companies started doing what they accused the DuPonts and the Anslinger administration and so forth of doing, and that is using false science in order to promote their own commercial benefits. So we don't want cannabis because it's a threat to DuPont plastics and it's a threat to the timber industry and so forth. So they came up with a lot of false science to make sure that that it was practically banned from the entirety of the world. And so now a lot of the cannabis activists from the early ages who came up and made their money and became big cannabis, wealthy big businesses. Now a lot of those people are using false science and scare tactics against their own industry in the same way that they earlier accused the DuPonts and the Anslingers of doing, in order to over-regulate small companies in order to defend their market share. And so I find, and they do it without actually acknowledging how ironic it is that they're using precisely the same techniques as they used to criticize. So I've been trying to certainly voice my opinion within the community and find like-minded people who will kind of build a wall against that kind of egocentric explanations and false science. So it's I'm not going to call it a huge problem, but it's certainly a wave that is destructive to some of the values that I stand for.
It's certainly been a failure of the industry for sure. In the IPC, the Infused Product Committee, we talk a lot about educating and experiences with dosing, testing, and labeling. What similarities, if any, do you see between the cannabis industry and the hemp CBD industry in terms of the need for dosing accuracy, for instance?
What the similarities are, quite straightforward. Is in as much as many, if not most, of the consumers are using cannabis as a therapeutic or a medicine, or based on an actual diagnosis or self-diagnosis. Uh, Understanding what you're taking is pretty important. Uh, there are varying levels, of course. I mean, I would argue that if it's a true pharmaceutical, it needs to be very precise, and because you're actually dealing with something which may have life or death implications, or at least massive quality of life implications. Whereas if you're picking up a pack of CBD gummy bears at your local Circle K, I don't think anybody's actually looking at that as a life-saving or life-changing gummy bear. So, there could be different standards, and certainly right down the middle is things like tinctures, capsules, and the standard CBD products. And where in the dietary supplement industry, I think you have like a reasonable range of dosing accuracy. Now, if you move over to THC, of course, I think your labeling needs to be a lot more accurate, because it has implications of how high are you going to be. Are you going to be able to do your homework, operate heavy machinery, or are you going to be riding the dragon or enjoying a bad TV sitcom? So there's heavy implications. So I would argue that CBD, that it's probably not as important in most applications, but important nonetheless.
Okay.
And I would also just point out one thing is, in the CBD industry, there's this overarching notion that seems to be just at this point public domain and boilerplate, that CBD companies do a bad job of labeling. Now, I'm not speaking for my own products, because we don't have any. We're a wholesale ingredient manufacturer, so I don't have a specific horse in this race. But my impression is that everybody just parrots the idea that CBD is the charlatan industry and everybody's mislabeling. And I've heard statistics that 60% of CBD products are mislabeled and blah blah blah. And I just don't think that's true. And when people cite those statistics, they seem to be citing public domain citations of other people citing other public domain citations. And sure, somebody's done that analysis, but the problem is with those analyses is, as a person who gets CBD testing done on a daily basis and multiple, we understand that the margin of error in those tests is really big, and that could have anything to do with your sample prep homogeneity, or it could have to do with the labs, like prep work and what they're actually testing, what protocols they're using. It could have to do with any kind of cross contamination or lab error, of course. But even if you're giving the benefit of the doubt and saying that labs are testing accurately within their means, a typical range of error that we expect is 15%. So if you put that across a standard CBD product, you say like it's supposed to be labeled as, make it simple, 1,000 milligrams in this bottle. That could mean 850, or that could mean or that could mean 1,150 variation, and that would still be within the range of expected error. Now, unfortunately, that range of expected error rarely pans out. So we see all the time a sample that we send twice to one lab, and we get it back, and it will say, there'll be a 30% disparity between the first and the second lab test of this exact same sample, and then we send it to other labs and get the same margin of error. So when the government and the advocacy groups and the groups that are looking to promote better labeling, which I think is an honorable intent, it seems to me that they're conclusions that our industry is doing a bad job on labeling is missing a huge piece of the puzzle, and that is, we're doing the best we can, and we are actually labeling more accurately than the dietary supplement, by writ large. So if you take the actual amount of curcumin in a turmeric capsule in CVS, or if you take the total doses in milligrams of your most simple vitamins and minerals in an ordinary natural product supplement, you are going to be way outside of 15%. And that's been documented over and over again with major brands and major stores. And so I think that the kind of circular shooting range of CBD companies promoting the industry as an industry that, what they're ultimately doing is saying that we have good labeling and the industry doesn't, so you should buy our product. And I found that always to be kind of an inaccurate piece of statistical science that doesn't pan out in my experience. And I just haven't seen that vast majority of CBD companies who are actually putting out products that are intentionally or negligently mislabeled. I think that most of what I've seen is well within a range of goodwill, good intent, and reasonable, given that it's a botanical supplement and not a lab-derived pharmaceutical. So, anyways, if I'm wrong, I'll be happy to stand to be corrected and jump on the bus and say that trust only those who make good product. But I think that we've been overstating that in our industry.
Yeah, being familiar with your company, I am familiar with all of the time and effort you have put into trying different labs and testing multiple times. And on the cannabis side, it's the same way. The level of scrutiny is very high, higher than CBD as it should be, but consistency in lab tests has made it very hard on the industry on both sides. And labeling accurately when labs can't get consistent, precise results is hard to do. It's a tall order.
So I would say that we should, what can be done to improve the quality of the conversation about dosing and labeling. And I think that what we can do to improve that is to acknowledge the range of accuracy that is reasonable within our product range. Because, for example, most labs, when you get a COA for any cannabis product, they'll tell you that it is 43.21% CBD. And not only is that hundredths place, the one, completely outside the range of actual stated accuracy, so is the actual 10th place, the two. So it's actually 43%, but the real range is 40 or 45. And so from the history of THC, it's more valuable than gold or titanium on a weight basis. And so of course it's very important to the commerce of THC to have that decimal point, because that means real money. And somehow where CBD is a little less valuable than THC, but that's transferred over into our industry. And the labs that are being held accountable for this testing actually are part of the problem by giving us the illusion of an accuracy to the hundredths of a percent. So I think that, to have any rational, real discussion about how to improve labeling, we have to come to a real understanding of what the labels should be. And that's part of the conversation that, frankly, I think is missing. And if we put it in there, then maybe some of these sensationalist accusations against the industry will be tamped down, and we'll be able to discuss it in a more in a way that promotes our industry's growth, and not one that puts us at the center of the target for criticism by outsiders and government.
Sure. The IPC tried to tackle this very issue of standardization of procedures for testing at the labs. And there, again, as you were talking about earlier, there is a lack of transparency there. And of course, that makes sense because people want to protect their operational IP, but it is putting operators at a disadvantage to not be able to get consistent testing results, and also having a regulation of being required to test to a certain accuracy or precision that the equipment or the procedures the labs are using can't actually do consistently. So there's a lot of problems there with regulators making rules that can't be executed on both sides of the industry.
Yeah. But identity testing in cannabinoids is and terpenes is just part of it. So where Absolutely. I kind of agree that people are having a relevant and meaningful conversation is on the contaminants. So again, I'm not deep at the core of this one, but if you listen to the buzz coming out of California, is that there's just an incredible amount of smokable flower and concentrates that have high levels of pesticides. So again, that may just be the circular shooting range of your industry that I'm catching the echo of. But whatever the merits of those public relations statements that are coming out, that is something where I think regulation and testing should be standardized and should be controlled by some higher level health and safety, which is more than likely not going to be a self-regulating organization, but a government organization. And that's particularly true for smokable flower and smokable concentrates, where those are directly going into your bloodstream, your lungs. So
you're bringing up a great point there. State by state on the cannabis testing side, rules are very different, and some states require a lot of testing for impurities, residuals, residual solvents, heavy metals, pesticides, and other states do not. So particularly in California, where they are testing for a variety of impurities, there is an educational component about neighboring farms that are contaminating flower from other industries like ag, like food ag. And so it is definitely an educational opportunity across the board, just for the nation as a whole, not just for the industry.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing to that is that the structures for controlling food and food and medicine and dietary supplement safety, are not being reinvented for our industry or the THC side. I mean, these obviously we have structures in place, the FDA, the USDA, we have public health and safety, and you can criticize each one in a million different ways, or you can accept the premise of their legitimacy in a million different ways. But one of the things that bothers me is when people suggest that just because there was a prohibition on cannabis for so many years that we are somehow need to be subject to special safety regulations, and or that our industry would draw less responsible, business proprietors and entrepreneurs and businesses than say any industry. So, but there is that notion floating around out there that we need extra careful regulations because we pose an extra risk. And in the case of THC, there is a extra risk, and that is crashing your car, or eating too much pizza. But with CBD, those risks really do not exist. I mean, it is just a generally safe thing to consume. The only thing within normal impurities, besides metals, etc., and THC content. Again, not to throw THC under the bus, but there are people who just don't want to be high when they go to school or work or whatever. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as an industry professional, what advice would you share with a new consumer?
Yeah, so strictly on the CBD side, I guess I just
either, but yeah.
Well, the THC side, I really wouldn't comment on because I'm not deep enough there. So, but I imagine there's similarities in the CBD side. I guess I got to stick to my guns here. As long as I've been promoting a kind of a small and medium business angle, I would say that there are huge companies in the industry that I think are, the Stanley Brothers, I think have done a fantastic job, and I think they're honest, ethical brand, and there's one that you could just pick off the shelf, and I think you could probably trust. And I think there are many others. I'm not, I have no relationship with them, so it's just a random pick. But so I wouldn't rule out the large corporate ones, but I also just be careful and not listen to the sensationalist anti small company propaganda, which is generally comes in the shape of they don't test well, they don't work in a GMP environment, they don't they don't know what they're doing, and they're in. And I would say that's untrue because most of the companies that are big now, I saw them when they were small a few years ago, and a lot of companies that didn't do good products didn't make it. So the laws of supply and demand amazingly work in CBD. So I think there will be selection, but you don't listen to the loudest bullhorn. Sometimes the person at the swap meet is selling a really superior product, and so people are gonna need to judge on their own merits. Do a lot of research, asking friends and family what's been effective for them. Once you found something you like, share. Let other people know that you found something which has the efficacy that you're looking for, and make sure that those brands and those companies are on the board with testimonials. And through that network, ultimately, the people doing the right thing for the right reasons will rise to the top. Of course, there'll be a few bad players that will rise to the top as well, just on the sheer investment or marketing power. But CBD is safe. There's no such thing as a CBD overdose. The minor cannabinoids are safe. You do want to be looking for whole plant stuff. You can make your own decisions on whether it has trace THC or doesn't. That's a personal decision. But it seems to me that if you listen to the people speaking the loudest in the industry, they are speaking out of their own commercial interests. So you should always filter commercial interests through the statements of fact that you seem to be listening to. So, dig a little deeper, listen to your yourself, your soul, your friends, your neighbors, and filter the big propagandistic information that you receive. Some of it will be true. Some of it will be commercially motivated.
Gotcha. So what is your route to stay well informed on the changes happening regularly? So it's a quick moving industry, a lot of people getting into it, a lot of rules changing across the nation. So how do you keep up to date on those changes?
Well, I had the good fortune or bad fortune, whatever, of when I just entered the industry. I was to kind of did a lot of due diligence, and I was kind of a data hound and made a lot of contacts really early on. And it turned out that I got a little bit lucky, and those contacts turned out to be some of the more remarkable people in the industry. And those are some of the real advocates, and on the legal side and on the social side, and so I stay in pretty close touch with the Hemp Industries Association and the National Hemp Association, Vote Hemp, and the Roundtable now is putting out just excellent work out of Kentucky, and uh, Hoban law firm has been a good mouthpiece for the industry and is doing a lot of good stuff. And so these are all kind of my friends and community. So a lot of this information is really firsthand. I see it developing, and I like to believe I participate in the development of policy. And so I stay abreast of that. But certainly at this point, I come in the office and have, 15 different mails from organizations like yours, and from Normal, and from the conventions and so forth. So I try to stay active and earn my seat at the table of advocacy, and through that, get a good amount of exchange of information with some of the industry leaders.
Great, and that makes me think of another question. So, what do you see as the future of? I mean, we've got these one plant, same plant, two different industries, slightly different cultivars, but what do you see as the trajectory of this whole plant's, consumer trajectory of this plant for both industries? Do you have any predictions on how this is going to go? I mean, it's split, and
yeah, well, I think if there's good news, I'm still worried about efforts to repress both or either, but honestly not too worried, because I don't think there's a crack in the levee. I think it's already flooding, and I think that the size and the shape of the industry is just way too hard to control. So all the traditional fears that people in our industry have of like big pharma, or some sort of commercial conspiracy by corporations and companies that compete with cannabis in some way, shape, or form. I think we have the firepower at this point. I think that the idea that they're going to convince politicians of any stripe at any level that cannabis should be illegal at any level is, that train has left the station, and it will only speed up in time to national legalization of THC. And of course, at this point, with the list of companies that have already committed to CBD being, every major beer brewing company, every single, Walmart's in, CVS is in, all the big retailers are in. It's only a matter of time before Amazon and Facebook tear down their barriers to entry. At that point, projections are that CBD by the end of 2022 will be the size of the entire dairy industry in North America, and that gives it enough credibility and firepower to sustain and not have major reversals in policy. And I think that THC is, in the minds of everybody under the age of 40, it's alcohol at this point, and I don't think there's going to be anytime soon when any politicians are going to try to make a new prohibition on alcohol, and likewise, I don't think it's coming for THC. So I think it's from there. It's plastics and car parts and all the things that cannabis can be used for outside of medicine, therapeutics, and recreation. Those things should start gaining a lot more attention, speed, and profitability in the coming years.
Thank you. Well, this has been really informative. Thank you for joining us today, Mike.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad we finally connected for this interview.
Me too. Me too. Well, have a lovely day. And that's it. I'm done.
All right.
All right.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks.
Ashley. Nice
Yeah.
chatting with you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right.
Good luck
Back
with
to work.
everything going on.
All right. You too.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.